We are living through the most deadly pandemic in over a century. Record temperatures hit Europe as climate change kicks in, and the entire West faces a wave of post-lockdown unemployment. But there is one issue which Britain's press and politicians have decided trumps all of these intersecting existential crises. Yes, 250 migrants in a dinghy. So the scaremongering story, which started on Nigel Farage's Twitter feed, has found its way to Britain's front pages and is leading the news on talk radio and has already inspired comment from the leading figures in our government. It's hysterical. It's also predictable. And this unhinged migrant bashing is our main story tonight. I'm going to be joined a little bit later by Aaron Bastani. Don't worry, he is on his way. And later in the show, we'll be talking about a case of potential corruption in government procurement of PPE. It's a pretty outrageous one. This is a real big scandal. We'll also talk about the Ford inquiry into alleged sabotage in Labour HQ. It was the final day of submissions into that inquiry into the Labour leaks, which we have discussed so much on this show. And at the end of the show, we're going to talk about why Joe Biden needs to stop talking. For all of us, because we can't handle 4 years more of Donald Trump, and the guy cannot finish sentences. Anyway, I won't introduce that whole section right now. As ever, share the show link and tweet your comments on the hashtag TiskiSour. Now, first story, and I want to get you to cast your minds back to April. So in April, Britain was in the strictest phase of its lockdown, and the public were looking in horror as daily deaths from coronavirus were regularly topping 1,000. It feels almost like a different age now. Many feared for their loved ones. Frontline workers were putting their lives on the line to fight this great battle against such a serious disease. But at the same time that all of this was happening, one man was still fighting a different crusade. This is Nigel Farage on April the 28th.
I'm here at Pett Level in East Sussex. This is now the favoured beach for migrants to come. Why? Well, we've got very shallow seas, we've got a sandy beach, and just up there we've got a slipway. And I think what's happening is boats are coming in here, dinghies are coming in here, dinghies' ribs are coming in here under cover of darkness, and they're able not just to unload the crew, but get the boats off on trailers as well. So we do see some where the border force tow people in. There are other people landing above and beyond the official figures, where the people are being smuggled away, where the boats are being taken away too. This is Pett Level. They won't be coming today. There's a little bit too much of a sea running. But normally, of course, it's a beautiful place.
Now, when that video first came out, it was mainly mocked. Obviously, at the start, that was a real accidental Alan Partridge moment, that sort of cutaway. It was bizarre, I suppose. I mean, there are also people saying, why is this man breaking lockdown? He seems to be in a vulnerable category. He doesn't seem like a particularly healthy man, drinks quite a lot, smokes quite a lot. Why has he gone to shout at the sea whilst everyone else is talking about procurement of PPE and talking about how we can, stay safe? People are worrying about their families. He's out there shouting because he's worried that a few brown people in desperate situations might land on our shores in dinghies. It seemed ridiculous at first. He's kept it up anyway. So he's been putting out periodic videos on his Twitter feed, lots of followers, involving, I suppose one of the ones that I think went furthest was him turning up to a hotel and asking for a room and then finding out, obviously he knew this was going to happen, but then the people who were working there telling him, no, all our rooms are taken up, because at that point in time they were being paid by the Home Office to house people who were seeking asylum. Nonsense stuff. But his latest video was shared on Thursday. In this one, he's absolutely irate that a charity paid for people seeking asylum to go on a tour of the Liverpool football stadium. Let's take a look at that one.
Aren't they now? Well, you can have those.
So that's the tunnel?
It's what used to be the tunnel. Right. But yeah, I think it's all been redeveloped since then. But yeah, that's from the changing rooms.
It says, all back home to Hoylake after a memorable day. Highlights were the excitement of seeing Mo Salah's peg in the changing room, the gasps as we walked through the tunnel into the stadium, and tucking into pizza and fish and chips. I mean, so basically, what you got to do, you got to get on a dinghy, cross the channel illegally. You can come somewhere nice like Hoylake. They put you up in a great hotel, and just after Liverpool have won the Premiership, they take you for a tour of the stadium. And you know, the people behind this charity who funded this trip to Anfield clearly think they're doing good. But actually, all these people will be sending selfies and pictures back to their countries, wherever they come from. And the message is, come on down, get into the country, hotels, 40 quid a week spending money, full board, trips to Anfield, who knows? Come to England legally, you might even play in the Premier League. I mean, that's the message that we're sending out. It's stone bonkers.
I mean, that's not the message that Britain is sending out. Nigel Farage says that the people who are donating to this charity, they thought they're doing good, but what they're ultimately doing is sending out the wrong message from Britain. Now, these people are doing good. If you've ever spoken to anyone who is trying to claim asylum in this country, it is a miserable process. The idea that it's all fun and laughter is for the birds. It's just absolutely false. It's people no recourse to public funds, very difficult to get enough money to live, put up in often the worst motels in the country, often with lots of people in difficult situations, completely hellish. And so for people who came to this country because they were vulnerable, just seeking a better life, for them to have a day off of the, I suppose, the turmoil that is trying to apply for asylum in this country, that's a good thing. Stop begrudging it. It's just bizarre. You might be thinking at this point, why on Tisky Sour are you giving airtime to this misanthropic, tragic ex-shock jock and xenophobic rambler often seen on Britain's beaches? But the reason why it matters, so this isn't just about Nigel Farage. We can't, unfortunately, just push him back into the box of irrelevance. And that's because what he says often has fed in to the mainstream. And this time around, it's done it again. So let's take a look at the Daily Mail this morning. So here you can see a source close to Home Secretary Priti Patel. She said Priti Patel is furious about people in dinghy seeking a better life, and she wants to send in the Navy to tackle the migrant crisis. It wasn't just Priti Patel this morning. Rishi Sunak was sent out onto Britain's TV studios, partly to talk about whatever is his latest voucher scheme that he's deployed, but also to talk about his frustration at the tide of boats crossing the channel. And now we all know that Nigel Farage has a unique ability to set the agenda, right? He's done it before. He's done it with Brexit. He's done it with migration, actually, back in 2014, back in the 2000s. But I had thought, I dared to hope that even though our government is desperate to find any excuse to distract people from the fact that Britain has the highest death toll in Europe from coronavirus due to their incompetence, that the current political environment wouldn't be as conducive to migrant bashing as what we've seen in this country in recent history. And that's because, you know, in the context of Black Lives Matter, you had Nigel Farage who lost his job at LBC. It seemed like potentially there was a bit of a turning of the tide in that period of time. You'll also note we had a government who, for most of March, April, and May, was talking about how much frontline workers, often from ethnic minorities, contribute to this country, how essential they have been in this moment of national crisis. I thought that potentially, you know, maybe they'd wait at least a year or two to start scapegoating migrants. Obviously, we talked on the show, they've gone for China as well because that fits better with the coronavirus narrative. But no, they've done it again. It is worth mentioning the mayor of Liverpool has spoken out against Nigel Farage with that stupid Liverpool video. The mayor has called him a substitute for a human being, and Liverpool fans themselves have come out in opposition. So this isn't to say, you know, not everything is lost in this country. It's just the gateway between Nigel Farage, the government, and in the middle you have the sort of the Sun, the talk radios, the Daily Mails, etc. etc. We'll talk, you know, when Aaron's in, we'll talk a bit more about sort of the political context here. But what I want to do also, because even though I know most of our audience don't agree that it's an existential crisis, that we have migrants coming over in dinghies to Britain in their hundreds. Not many people. There are some people in the country, many people in fact, who do think this is a problem, and so it's important to debunk that, to show why it's such a stupid position. And to do that, I want to show two clips from the UK's premier outlet for ill-informed xenophobia before we debunk them. The first is Julia Hartley-Brewer speaking to Alp Mehmet, who is chairman of Migrant Watch.
Is it beyond the ability of the government to stop this from happening?
Clearly, at the moment, it is. Good morning to you. Look, this goes back, I think, the current problem to something that the Prime Minister said in August last year. He said, "We will send you back. If you come illegally, you are an illegal migrant, and I'm afraid the law will treat you as such." Well, how many have gone back? 155. We've had something like 6,000 already. We reckon that just this year alone, there are 4,000 who've already arrived, and there will be anything up to 8,000 by Christmas. The machine at the moment is switched to suck rather than blow, frankly. And unless we really get a grip, the numbers are simply going to continue going up.
So he's saying that 4,000 people already have crossed the channel, and by Christmas it could go up to 8,000. We need to get a grip before the number of asylum seekers coming to this country via Calais and via the channel reaches such great numbers as 8,000. Come on, I think it is the director of Migration Watch who needs to get a grip. Let's do some comparisons. 8,000. Keep that number in your mind. This is all of this scaremongering, all of these headlines, that segment on Talk Radio, the comments from Priti Patel, the comments from Rishi Sunak. They're all about 8,000 migrants coming, or projections for 8,000, 4,000 so far this year. Now, let's look at how Britain compares to other countries, because the message we get, Britain's a light touch. People come here because we give out asylum claims like they're lollipops, right? That's not remotely true. We should be factual here, not like Julia Hartley-Brewer and her guests tend to be. So France and the UK have the same population size, both 66 million. And we're going to get up some stats now of number of first-time asylum applicants in European countries. Now, what you can see there is that in France, we've got about 120,000 people seeking asylum between 2018 and 2019. In the United Kingdom, less than 50,000, 40,000. Tiny, tiny numbers. Greece as well, population of 11 million, 75,000 applicants. Germany, their population is slightly bigger, but as you can see, the number of asylum applications made in that country are huge. So this idea that Britain is becoming too overwhelmed because 4,000 to 8,000 people are going to arrive on our shores from Calais, it's nonsense. And it's not just nonsense, it's pathetic. So these are exactly the same kind of people who want to say, Britain is the best country in the world. We have the capacity and the strength to compete with other countries on all levels. And they're also exactly the kind of people who say that Britain is the least racist country in the world. Now, if we are both the country with, the best economy, the most talented people, the biggest sort of economic capacity, and we're the least racist, then why the hell are we so worried about 8,000 people arriving on our shores? I should also say, I gave you European examples. The most, I suppose, important and striking contrast to make with Britain is that of Lebanon. So in Lebanon, there are 1.5 million Syrian refugees in a country with a population of 7 million. In Britain, 66 million people, and we're having headlines, government ministers, talk show hosts railing against 8,000 people, 4,000 people arriving in dinghies. I'm going to go to Aaron in one sec because he is back. Aaron is in the building. But first of all, I do want to show you Julia Hartley-Brewer, because obviously the representative for Migration Watch there was no pushback saying 8,000, is that all you're talking about? There was no pushback because Julia Hartley-Brewer wholeheartedly agrees. Let's take a look at her monologue this morning.
This is happening on a grand industrial scale every single day, and it has been for years on end. It's always worse in the summer months. 2 years ago, we were told it's an emergency situation. So why hasn't the government, whoever's in charge at any one time as Home Secretary, acted already? Why does it wait for the Brexit Party leader, Nigel Farage, to actually show video footage of this for everyone else to pay attention? I don't care what your views are on immigration or not, whether you want mass immigration from the EU or not. Well, tough. You lost that vote in 2016, folks. But even if you want that, on what planet do you think that mass illegal immigration is a good thing? No one getting on a dinghy in France is desperate. They might have been desperate on their way to France. Yes, I don't want to live in Libya or any other war-torn countries either. But you're in France. It's a safe country. Claim asylum there. You're not our problem.
Now, there's so many layers of stupidity in that smug 1 minute statement there from Julia Hartley-Brewer. I mean, first of all, this idea that you might be for legal migration, but not illegal migration. Now, the problem with that argument is you can only really claim asylum once you're on Britain's shores. So the way to become a legal migrant, to become a refugee, to get granted asylum, is to first come illegally. If there was, an office, a branch of the Home Office out in Yemen or out in Syria where you could apply for British citizenship and be treated incredibly fairly, then maybe that argument would work. But that's not the case. The way you get asylum to this country, or to most countries, in fact, is you have to arrive there. So to say, I've got no problem with migration, but I hate illegal migration, ultimately you have a problem with migration, don't you? The other point she makes, I just think, unbelievable. This idea that people in France, even if they had a difficult time on the way, are having a great time. Now, I've been to Calais. I'm not a huge Calais activist. There are people who are doing way more work than me, but I've been there and I've spoken to people who are living in camps, in tents over there. They're people who are getting beat up constantly by racist riot police, whose makeshift homes are being constantly crushed to the ground, who are having to live through all of the seasons without proper housing. It is not a nice place to be. These are not people who are having a nice time sipping wine and eating nice cheese, and just because they want to, they're coming to this country. As to whether it's our problem, right? Now, when I went to Calais, it was about 10 years ago, and the people who were there were from Afghanistan. So why were they there? Because our country had gone and bombed their country and the state had collapsed. Where are many of the migrants who are coming over this summer from? From Yemen. Their state has also collapsed because they've been bombed by Britain's ally, Saudi Arabia, who are armed to the teeth by our country, right? So this idea that, oh, yes, it might be nice to let in migrants, but ultimately it's not our problem, is completely bullshit. So many people in the world, the reason they are moving, the reason they have to move, is because of crimes this country has committed. And now Julia Hartley-Brewer, after, I don't know if she backed those wars, in fact, actually, but I mean, there are many people in this country who backed those wars, who have completely destroyed states. Now, 8,000 people arriving on our shores. Oh, terrible, everything's going to collapse. It's nonsense. Aaron Bastani is in the building. How are you doing, Aaron? Well, not in the building, because that's not how we film them now.
Well, no, it's not. Tragically, Michael, it's not. I am here, however. How
very
are you?
well, a little bit sweaty, but that's life, isn't it? What do you make of all of this? Are you surprised at how quickly politics has gone back to normal, I suppose, which is that you've got a Conservative government following the lead of Nigel Farage to try and scapegoat migrants to distract from the problems which they have created?
Well, this is going to keep on happening. And the shibboleth has been that people win elections from the centre, even though we had 2 general elections where that wasn't the case. That was blown out of the water. Obviously, last December, Boris Johnson did not win that from the centre. 2017, you had a polarisation of the electorate. 40% went to Labour, 40% went to the Tories. The Tories actually running on quite a coherent right-wing agenda, a hard Brexit agenda. Labour going on, probably the most robust socialist message they had in decades. So the idea that you win elections from the centre is patently untrue, despite the fact we have a liberal intelligentsia hell-bent on repeating it, almost like counting sheep as they go to sleep. And this is carrying on. We're seeing this continue now. So yes, the Tories are in government. Yes, they have a majority. That doesn't mean they tack to the centre. It doesn't mean that Labour can somehow take some of their policies. And the whole project on the right in the last 30 years has been shifting British politics further to the right on culture, on economic policy, on foreign policy. And sadly, the Labour Party's aided and abetted that to a significant extent in recent decades, particularly under the Blair government, particularly when it came to foreign policy, but actually later on cultural issues to immigration as well, particularly really after the 2001 general election. And so, yes, we are back to business as usual, but I don't think anybody should be surprised. This is how politics in this country has operated for a couple of generations now. And I think you'd have to be missing, I'm going to be charitable, not brain cells, but, I would struggle to understand. I'd struggle to comprehend how somebody wouldn't expect that. Oh yeah, Boris Johnson's now going to do this kind of inclusive one nation Tory stuff. He will do, but he's also got to keep the millions of former UKIP voters that the Tories won over at the last general election. That will include necessarily the kind of rhetoric we're seeing from Julia Hartley-Brewer and Nigel Farage on immigration. That's going to have to happen because that's part of his coalition. And I think the left needs to have a robust understanding of how to respond to that. And what you've said is just so spot on. For all these hawks that wants to go to Libya, wants to go to Syria. Now, there are very strong arguments for saying that the governments in those respective countries, Gaddafi in Libya, Assad in Syria, aren't good people. I agree with that. But the point is, if you're going to engage in a military intervention, if you're going to back a certain faction, if you're going to potentially see state failure, which is what we now see in Libya, you also have to have a domestic political consensus which says, well, one of the downsides of that set of choices is we'll see a flood of people leaving those countries coming here. Many immigrants, not all, many undocumented migrants coming to Britain today are from Afghanistan, Iraq. Some are from Iran, a country that's been subject to decades of sanctions, Libya, across North Africa. These are places which have been destabilized for decades as part of Western foreign policy. We've fundamentally sought to undermine democratic governments whenever they've appeared, however rarely it's been, in these exact same places. Syria in the 1950s, Iran in the 1950s. We presently support a tyrant in Egypt in the form of al-Sisi. So I agree with you entirely. It's such an irony that the very people who are so happy, joyful, ecstatic to intervene militarily in these countries don't want to have to deal with some of the adverse consequences, which is mass displacement of human beings.
I mean, the thing I just find really maddening is like on the Julia Hartley-Brewer show, these right-wing pundits, their main talking point at the moment is stop doing our country down. Our country's actually brilliant and we can do great things. Why are the left so miserable? It's the reason Boris Johnson won is because he told the British people, you actually aren't that bad. You can be great. This country does have potential. They're also the people who spend, the other half of their time saying, why is everyone calling Britain racist? Britain's the least racist, most tolerant, progressive country in the world, and not just in the world, in world history. So the idea is people like Tom Harwood always saying, Britain is exceptionally anti-racist, welcoming. If those two things are the case, if we're both a country with enormous potential, with enormous capacity, and we're the least racist country in human history, then why can we not just accept 8,000 people in a desperate situation who are looking for a better life, right? And yeah, you can use the Julia Hartley-Brewer, but that's illegal immigration. What about legal immigration? So I've shown you the numbers already. The United Kingdom accepts 40,000 migration applicants between 2018 and 2019. A country like Germany up 160,000. And as I said before, Lebanon, a country with 7 million people, has 1.5 million refugees. Now, if we as a country are as great as Julia Hartley-Brewer thinks and as non-racist as Julia Hartley-Brewer thinks, then I would suggest we can take that proportion of refugees. And if we can't, then you have to ask the question, why? What is wrong with this country that means that people think there's going to be civilizational collapse if 8,000 people arrive in dinghies? It doesn't make any sense.
Such an astute observation, Michael. You're absolutely right. She needs to, look, Julia, say it with your heart. I don't want these people here. That's what she wants to say. And that's what all of these people want to say. Sometimes they do explicitly say it. But the argument that we can't afford to look after these people is patently ridiculous. We've just socialized the wages of 10 million people. Like you say, these exact same voices in the media, Julia Hartley-Brewer, Nigel Farage, the exact same people are calling on, the Blitz and the Battle of Britain and how that same spirit and zeitgeist can push us through a no-deal Brexit. And yet we can't deal with several thousand people rocking up in dinghies on the south coast. So it's clearly not a resource issue. It's clearly not a governance or competence issue. We can clearly bring these people into the labour market. Some will need help. Some won't. Some will be a net benefits that actually the majority of them, young, able-bodied people, will be a significant benefit to the in terms of tax and spend. We don't want to go into a sort of economic calculus here, but that's just a fact. But that isn't the point to these people. It's because they don't want them here. Now, why don't they want them here? One argument was that they just don't like foreign people. Another argument is, and I think Trump did this very well, to say, look, I love legal migration. As many people can come legally as they want. Obviously, he doesn't mean that. But illegal migration can't happen. You're absolutely right, Michael. The minute somebody's here, they're claiming asylum. That's not illegal. They're here entirely legally. There are multiple international treaties designed precisely for these events. It's covered by international law in a number of ways. But I guess the question is, how do you address the emotiveness of the issue? Because there is this sense that people come here, they get something for nothing. I think that's what gets the heart of it. If people didn't think that, if UKIP voters, people that like Julia Hartley-Brewer, Nigel Farage, follow them on social media and so on, if they didn't think instinctively these people were getting something for nothing, then there wouldn't be a problem. I don't know if necessarily the argument is against immigration per se, because 9 times out of 10, you show them somebody, you say, oh, this is, Ahmed down the road, or, Charlotte from France, and there are benefits to the community. He works in a shop. He works 100 hours a week. She's a nurse. She's helping the NHS. They'll go, good for them. It's the other ones. It's the ones that don't produce the value. It's the ones that don't help. It's the ones that don't contribute. And I guess the question is, how do you address that intuitive argument that people like Farage and Hartley-Brewer mobilize so effectively?
I mean, that's a good point. How do you make that emotional argument? Because the rational arguments are so obvious, and we're still losing this battle. And we're going to move on to our next story in a moment. First of all, a super chat from Dave Watson. Scapegoating, an age-old ritual that seeks to discharge the sins, pain, and discomfort of a society. A very astute observation. And we've got almost 1,700 people watching. Let's get to 2,000 tonight. Back at the start of July, when the Treasury announced they had spent £15 billion on PPE, so personal protective equipment, many wondered how such huge sums could have been spent on basic items such as masks, gloves, and gowns. Now, of course, this is an exceptional year. We needed far more PPE than usual, and with a global shortage, producers were selling at a higher price. But as lawyers and campaigners dig into the procurement deal, so those contracts signed between governments and suppliers, there have emerged many, many reasons to be suspicious about what has in fact gone on. It doesn't just seem like this was a case of, we needed more and it was a little more expensive. No, well, it's more suspicious things has been going on. So the particular case we're going to focus on today is one that's sort of come out this week. And it's the case of the £150 million payment made to a firm called Ayanda Capital for medical grade masks. So keep that in mind, £150 million. So this raised alarm bells, this particular purchase, because this £150 million for masks was given to a company, Ayanda Capital, which has nothing to do with manufacturing PPE and nothing to do with manufacturing altogether. So if we look at their website, it says they specialize in currency trading, offshore property, private equity, and trade financing. It's owned through the tax haven of Mauritius. So this is not a manufacturing company. This is your bog standard tax avoiding offshore property wealth extractor. Now, from this company, which had no history of PPE production or any production whatsoever, the government ordered 50 million FFP2 masks. We can take a look at those as well now, I think. So 5 million of these masks are used in a normal year in our health service, but this was projected to rise to 50 million due to the pandemic. Again, seems like a reasonable projection. But the government, what they did is they ordered 50 million from Ayanda Capital. So the entire amount that they had projected we would need, they bought from this one company who never before had produced masks. Well, I was going to say masks of this kind, but they've never produced anything remotely similar to masks. Okay, so it seems like that's an incredibly big risk. You're putting all of your eggs in one basket, and it's a pretty unpredictable basket you've put them in. Doesn't have handles. Now, it turns out that after paying £150 million, none of the masks ordered from this company worked. So there was a risk. It didn't pay off. It turns out it's for a sort of technical reason. That's because they were fitted with ear straps, so straps that go around your ears instead of straps that go around your head. And I think the idea is that the ear straps don't quite seal the edge of the mask as much as it does if you strap it around your head. None of them can be used in the NHS. So what we've got is a government who've paid £150 million for what should have been their entire supply, or should have made up their entire supply of masks for a year. None of them work. They're not usable. It's a huge waste of money. Now, you might see that as a case of incompetence. This was the government in the middle of a pandemic, which no one had foreseen. Actually, that's not true. People had foreseen it and the government had ignored the warnings. But in any case, there are obviously people in a very stressful situation. And it could just be down to incompetence. But due to an investigation by barrister Jolyon Maugham, so of People's Vote and Fox killing fame, but who is now doing God's work, even if we haven't always approved of his previous projects, we have evidence that this wasn't just a cock-up, but potentially outright corruption. And this focuses, so the suspicions have been raised because of the involvement of this particular man. We're going to get him up, Andrew Mills. Now, Andrew Mills is a senior board advisor to Ayanda Capital. So they're the firm that had never produced masks, which the government paid £150 million to produce a hell of a lot of masks. He is also, it turns out, an advisor to the UK Board of Trade, so working directly with Liz Truss. So this contract was signed with a company closely connected to a government advisor, loads of money, and the products don't work. Now, when asked about these connections by Maugham, so by Jolyon Maugham, and why the government had made such a risky and costly purchase from one of their own advisors, or a company very close, or a company associated with one of their advisors, the government responded that the original offer had not in fact been made by Ayanda Capital, but by a different company called Prosper Mill. Now, Ayanda, what they say is they were just brought on board because they could deal with international payments, and it was actually a different company, Prosper Mill, which had agreed to provide this equipment. And so it was almost a formality that they did it with Ayanda Capital. Now, this, I mean, I don't know the details of how these things work, but you could say on face value, that kind of makes sense. Fine, maybe Ayanda Capital didn't really have that much to do with it. Now, the problem with that argument is, who are Prosper Mill? You couldn't make this up. So it turns out Prosper Mill are a company who was set up in 2019 with assets of £100, no demonstrable knowledge of PPE or anything whatsoever. So again, looks risky, looks irresponsible. But now let's look at the directors. So its founders and directors are Caroline Mills and her husband, Andrew. Yes, Andrew, government advisor and senior board advisor to Ayanda Capital, Andrew Mills. So you've got the government who've procured masks from a company who've never made masks, and they've ordered the entire projection that they need for the year of masks. So they haven't just said, oh, we'll try you out for a first round and we'll come back for more. No, they've said, we're going to buy 50 million masks from you for £150 million. They've arrived. None of them worked. And the NHS is left with no extra masks. The government has lost taxpayers £150 million. But a government advisor, it seems, has come out quite well from this. So presumably he's made a very tidy profit. Apparently margins in this kind of business, buying and selling medical equipment during coronavirus, were 10 to 20%. You can say that's probably about £15 million. That's a projection. That's what Jolyon Maugham was saying. It seems we don't have proof of how much this money has gone into this guy's bank account, but you can see all of these connections there. It doesn't look good. Aaron.
I mean, does it matter? That's the thing. You say it doesn't look good. Does it matter? Do you think it matters?
It might do.
Why?
I mean,
Tories are still polling 43.
Well, yeah. I mean, it will matter if people make it matter, and I suppose our media are quite unlikely.
I don't think these scandals matter in the slightest. I think the furlough scheme. I'm not saying the Tories are untouchable. If the furlough scheme is ended, as it looks like it will be, and there's no appropriate replacement, and we have mass unemployment, that's obviously a major problem for the Tories. But I just think this stuff is background noise. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It won't go anywhere. It's not politically salient to most people. Okay, the politicians are corrupt. Okay, tell me something I didn't know. There's no bad guys.
Doesn't it just matter if you make it matter, though? You know, obviously, if a Labour government had done this, there would be people shouting from the rooftops about how this was completely unacceptable. You'd have resignations would be forced, and so I'm not sure if it's particularly strategically sensible to say, because this won't matter, we shouldn't talk about it. If it's unacceptable, we should make it clear that it's unacceptable.
Michael,
And if enough people are making noise about it, then potentially the government will have to change its ways. I mean,
it's unacceptable. But the reality is, Michael, if the boot was on the other foot, if Labour in government, the Tories were in opposition, the equivalent would be Ash Sarkar, Matt Zarb, and James Schneider running the country's 3 largest papers by circulation, right? And yeah, okay, then maybe you might have some movement. We're not, but given the present sort of media climate in this country, media ownership, I think people are politically fatigued in terms of COVID. I think there's so much information coming through with coronavirus. There's probably an instinctive recognition the Tories have done very badly, but I think there's information overload, new scandals every day. I just don't see why the opposition isn't chasing it. So the opposition isn't making any moves. We know all the problems we just talked about with the media. Information fatigue on behalf of the electorate. I mean, I honestly think it means nothing. Again, it's one of those things. Julian Moore, this is a fantastic, unveiling, really public interest, fantastic for the functional media. All power to him. But I think in Britain in 2020, with a sedate, quite frankly, almost Labour leadership, with a media which is positively spinning every day for the government. No, I don't think it'll do anything. Do you?
Well, I'm going to segue now into if you want, and we didn't prearrange this particular sequence, but if you want to make stories like this matter, you're probably going to have to go to novaramedia.com/support because no one else is going to do it. Although credit to Jolyon Morm, who this time around, as I say, we haven't approved of many of his previous projects and his previous passions, but this seems like a good case to take on. And this is, I'm going to go through court. This isn't just an investigative, or it's not an investigative piece of journalism from Jolyon Morm. It's the background of a legal case. So this could cause legal problems, even if, as Aaron says, whether or not it will cause political problems will depend on whether people want to take it forward. And given what we know our press is like and how timid the opposition seem at this point in time, that's
Michael,
somewhat unlikely.
Can I come back in?
Yes.
I mean, even if we had the media screaming from the rooftops, I mean, you have a leader of the opposition who won't, and people might disagree that, oh, God, Aaron's attacking Keir Starmer. I'm not attacking anybody. The boot could be on the other foot. It could be Labour in government, the Tories in opposition. I would say the same thing. Why isn't the leader of the opposition actually talking about this stuff in quite an assertive, strident way? Yesterday, Keir Starmer was asked, or 2 days ago. No, it was yesterday, wasn't it? He was asked about whether the approach of the Westminster government or the Welsh government was preferable. Of course, Labour is in government in Wales, and Keir Starmer couldn't give a straight reply favouring his own colleagues. So there is a big, big problem here. There's the structural problem, and I'll be honest, that's the bigger problem in terms of the media. But then there is also this is not a Labour Party which is looking to get scalps. And people love to talk about New Labour and Tony Blair and Alistair Campbell. You can be absolutely damn sure in 1995, Alistair Campbell and the coterie around Tony Blair, the coterie around New Labour, Peter Mandelson and so on, they would have been chasing this. They would have made, the relevant people's lives hell. You can absolutely be sure that Dominic Cummings would have gone, by the way. And I think the difference between something like this and Dominic Cummings is Dominic Cummings firstly has name recognition, or people know he's this kind of Mephistophelian guy behind the scenes. People kind of knew who he is already. And then secondly, hypocrisy goes down terribly. It's, the elite telling people to do something and not doing it themselves. I mean, that is a really comprehensible thing to most ordinary people. But, a procurement contract involving tens or hundreds of millions of pounds for a piece of equipment, I just don't think it's salient or immediately comprehensible to most of the electorate. It just goes into white noise. Politicians are bad. There's lots of corruption about. Oh, well. And also, by the way, I think these kinds of stories are actually a net negative for left politics, because basically the default thing is, things can't really get better, can they? This is what politics is like. And I think, if this becomes the sort of default for the left, or these everyday stories, and this is what politics is like, this is what politicians are like, I don't think it bodes well for a positive progressive politics in the next 5-10 years.
So what do you think we should do? Just ignore the corruption?
I don't think we should ignore it. I just don't think it's a major story. We saw a lot of this with the Brexit stuff as well, right? These kind of everyday little stories. We said, no, you have to offer an alternative. This trying to catch people out, given the media landscape in this country, it's not going to work. The alternative was, I think, Labour in the 2017 general election. You talk about your policies on your terms. There's no alternative given the media landscape in this country.
So 2019, we did a very negative camp because Labour ran out of ideas, Brexit. And all they could say was they're going to sell the NHS. They're going to sell the NHS. People didn't really believe it. It was a bit of a desperate campaign. It looked a bit like Brexit, Labour in every election over the last 20 years.
Yeah, we're going to go to Brexit election, which is what the Tories wanted.
We're going to go to a story which is very salient among Labour members, even if not among the wider public. Before we do that, make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you find out every time we go live. Today was the final day the inquiry set up into the Labour leaks was accepting submissions from staff members, politicians, and interested parties. So the inquiry led by Martin Ford QC has been tasked with assessing the contents of the report, which was compiled by Labour Party staff members to be submitted to the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, but ultimately wasn't because the lawyers objected and then was leaked to the press and the public. And I'm sure all of our viewers know what was in that report. It was about senior staff members in 2017 taking actions which made it seem as if they were working against the leadership. I say seem because everyone's suing everyone at the moment, but you can read them yourself. And which the document also alleged showed their mismanagement of anti-Semitism complaints, potentially for factional reasons, and racist and sexist language made about senior politicians, so including Diane Abbott. They were probably some of the parts of that report which were most shocking to Labour members. So this commission, this inquiry, will look into the contents of that report, how it came to be made, and how it came to be leaked. And yeah, as I say, submissions closed today. Most of those submissions will be anonymous and will remain anonymous, but for various reasons, certain people have leaked theirs to the press. So the first group is a group of ex-staff members who the report alleges sabotaged the 2017 general election. And we'll get the copy from The Guardian in terms of, because it's The Guardian they leaked their submission to. So in a formal submission to the inquiry seen by The Guardian, lawyers for the accused officials say the WhatsApp messages were used selectively and edited to give a false impression. They also say the inquiry should be abandoned given the damage already caused by the leaked report. The 11-page submission claims that some WhatsApp messages sent months apart were joined together to create a false narrative, and others were removed so that by such editing a deliberately false impression that racist and misogynistic conversations had taken place. It says the unnamed authors of the leaked report should not have had access to the WhatsApp messages. This always makes me laugh, adding that one member of the WhatsApp group accidentally backed them up via their Labour email and that a data misuse complaint is with the Information Commissioner's office. I love that the origin story of this report is that one of the staff members in these chats where they sort of shit talk various Labour politicians and talk about how much they hate left-wing members of the Labour Party. They downloaded, or I don't even know I've never downloaded Aaron, have you ever downloaded a WhatsApp chat?
No, that's not because I'm trying to get compromising material on my dearest friends, which is what this person was probably trying to do.
So they were probably going to try and get compromising material on someone else who was right-wing, but it ended up fucking them all over. That's why you shouldn't be friends with snakes, I suppose. Well, I'm not going to call anyone a snake in case alleged opinion.
Well, no, I think it's fair to say one should not be friends with snakes. This is as a separate point.
That's true. Separate issue. Completely different issue. Just so happens to be relevant. Let's look at some more of the moments from that. So they also say this is from what I've already read, but they're saying the inquiry should be abandoned given the damage already caused by the leaked report. Now, if your submission to a report which is in part about your behavior says it doesn't seem like there's that much evidence as to what was in the report wasn't what it meant to be. I don't know, maybe they're going to come up with some WhatsApp messages which show that when they told a Channel 4 journalist that Diane Abbott was crying in the toilet, that actually within context, that was not an incredibly abusive thing to do to a senior member of your party when you're a senior member of staff. I can't really imagine what that context would be, but theoretically, I suppose it could exist. But it doesn't seem like they're relying on this kind of evidence. They're just trying to say this report shouldn't go ahead at all. And when people don't want to be investigated, it's normally because they know they've done something wrong. It's also worth recognizing that these people who say they don't want the report to go ahead, the people in charge of this report are not their factional enemies. I mean, many on the left are disappointed because they think that this report is very much in Keir Starmer's image. And to be honest, I think actually is largely, well, almost prejudged now that the Labour Party have paid, seems about £500,000 in damages to staff members who the Labour Party had said had acted in ways which were similar to what the report claims. Basically, these were politically motivated people who were acting in a politically motivated way, not in the best interests of the party, and potentially not being particularly honest about their role in the party. So the fact that Labour have paid that out means that I don't have that much faith in this report. But even though it seems to be prejudged in the favour of the people who appear in it, they still want it to be abandoned because they don't want any of this to be touched whatsoever. Let's go to another submission or something else that's been leaked. This was Jeremy Corbyn. I say leaked, it's leaked by themselves to the newspapers on purpose. So it's to say we want what we have submitted to be public. It's not that the recipients of these submissions have leaked them. So Corbyn's submission was made jointly with Labour's 2017 election committee. So that includes John McDonnell, John Trickett and Ian Lavery, and 5 senior aides to Corbyn at that time. So in that 2017 election, Carrie Murphy, Seamus Milne, Andrew Fisher, Andrew Murray, and Steve Howell. Again, we can go to the Guardian copy because it was them. It was the Guardian who was shown. So the former opposition leader and his team said there was overwhelming evidence of sabotage from certain staffers in Labour headquarters. The officials who were not named were uncooperative and refused to allocate resources to winnable target seats, the submission said. Given Labour's narrow loss in 2017, they argued it's not impossible that Jeremy Corbyn might now be in his 3rd year as the Labour Prime Minister were it not for the unauthorised unilateral action taken by a handful of senior party officials. So that's the report from Corbyn and team. I think it seems sensible that they've sort of submitted that as a group so they can't be picked off one by one. We know that is what Corbyn's opponents prefer to do. And obviously Corbyn's submission was also backed up by an article in Open Democracy by Joe Ryle, who used to work for John McDonnell, with some quite interesting revelations about how committed right-wing staff members were to undermine Corbyn's leadership at the start, emptying offices, not giving anyone any equipment or computers, even though it was the responsibility of HQ, dragging their feet anytime an event was supposed to be organized. So basically not doing their job for political reasons, it seems. That's the allegations. Aaron, your thoughts on this? I'm guessing you're more siding with the Corbyn submission than the submission from the lawyer of the ex-staff members.
Yeah, so I remember going to see Joe Ryle a few weeks into the Corbyn leadership. I remember going to see him in Portcullis House, where obviously all the new teams were becoming embedded. And I remember him making a video for John McDonnell, and he was using a trial version of Premiere Pro, video editing software. And I said, why don't you buy Premiere Pro? You're now working for the Shadow Chancellor. And he said, we can't get sign off for anything. And so he was having to use a new trial version of some software every month, rather than just get sign off for a package, Adobe package, which would cost like, I don't know, even a really extensive one for the whole Shadow cabinet. It's not going to cost huge amounts of money. People really have to understand how bad this was. This was a complete kamikaze effort from day one by people at the very top of the Labour Party to ensure that Corbyn ultimately didn't get very far. And I want to just pick up on what you were saying about the inquiry itself. I mean, I suspect it will be a whitewash. I mean, we did a great piece on this. It was written by a lawyer very familiar with these kinds of inquiries. He's, it's his job. And he thinks that the way in which the ambit and the focus of the inquiry is so limited, he thinks the motivation here is to really damp things down and constrain its findings rather than scope out and try to discern broader historic systemic problems. We'll see. It doesn't bode particularly well. But what I find interesting is you have the submission by these people saying, oh, we were taken out of context. It sounds, it's reminiscent of Milo. When people were saying to Milo, you said this outrageous thing, you were sort of, an apologist for some terrible kinds of behavior. And he said, you have to see these things in their context. It's kind of the sort of thing like an alt-right troll says, oh, you said this racist or this sexist thing. That has to be seen in its context. Well, excuse me, if you call somebody, pube head or a fucking cow, I don't see what context that, is going to help you there. Or if you're going to be instructing journalists, hostile journalists, as to the whereabouts of a black politician who is traumatized by racist abuse on social media, I would love to know the context which would explain that sequence of behavior. And in fact, I mean, that should be more reason for the inquiry. Let's have all of these WhatsApp messages, all of these emails assessed by the inquiry. And hey, why don't we just have it all open to the public? If this is about clearing these people's name and contextualizing what they've said, which have been so dramatically and criminally misrepresented by whoever compiled this report, well, let's have it all out in the open.
I agree with that. We're going to go to our final story in a moment. First of all, you know that Novara Media Tysky Sour is only possible because of your kind support. If you are one of our viewers who donates 1 hour's wage a month via novaramedia.com/support. Thank you so much. If not, you know where to go. We appreciate all of your super chats. Whatever you can afford is what makes this possible. Final story. It's a fun one, actually. Joe Biden is running a great campaign, with Donald Trump royally screwing up the fight against coronavirus. The reassuring normality of Joe Biden appears to many people a more attractive proposition than Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. Moreover, in a time of national crisis, unlike in 2016, the country might really be seeking someone who seems to be an experienced, safe pair of hands, someone who perhaps was vice president in an era when government seemed to be somewhat competent and compassionate. I mean, Obama was good at sounding compassionate. Indeed, according to the polling site 538, Biden is now up by 8 percentage points in the average of national polls. Most importantly, because obviously you can win the popular vote and still lose the presidency, he has an advantage of 5 points or more in several key battleground states, so including Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, all states that Clinton lost. So on one level, it's all looking good. There is a problem, though, and the problem is that there are two Biden campaigns. So the Biden campaign that's doing quite well is the one where he doesn't speak and his operatives do the talking via, campaign videos, by official announcements, by adverts. And the other campaign is where Biden has to actually go out onto television and speak for himself in his own voice without prompts, and where it's not possible to do a second take because he's live on TV. We're going to look at the two Bidens now. We're going to start with the Biden that seems to be doing pretty well, the Biden which I think is, I suppose, down to the fact that his polling is quite good at the moment. We're going to look at a couple of campaign ads. This one here is being targeted at older voters. I think it's very effective.
Roger and I decided that we wanted to move to the villages. We were ready to retire. We were both 60. He was in the military. I had the business for 10 years. My husband and I are both concerned about the virus and catching it. I know other people have things a lot worse, but we feel trapped here because we can't go to be with the ones that we love. My husband and I have been gifted with 2 beautiful grandchildren. We try to see them as often as possible, and it's been 6 months. And it's way too long. And while I don't blame Donald Trump for the virus, I blame him for his lack of action. And because of that, we're sitting here Zooming or FaceTiming with our grandchildren instead of hugging and kissing them. And that's hard. Joe Biden knows that every moment is precious. I trust Joe Biden to get this virus under control.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Now, to me, that's a super effective advert. You're appealing to people who, the Democrats often have difficulty with, and an incredibly important voting bloc. Older voters, especially older white voters, is who the Democrats struggle with, who put Donald Trump into power. And unlike the Hillary Clinton campaign, they're not really focusing on Donald Trump or the offensive things he says. They're focusing on an issue that genuinely matters to people, which is coronavirus, the fact that it has divided families, and the fact that Donald Trump has been completely incompetent at dealing with it. I mean, it's almost sympathetic to Donald Trump in the way. Says, we don't blame him for coronavirus. We just blame him for not responding quickly enough to it. It seems to be almost downplaying the culture war and saying, look, you don't have to despise that. We're not telling you he's the worst person in the world. We're just saying he's not particularly effective. And you're putting Joe Biden up there, loads with a face mask. Obviously he is someone who is trying to deal with the coronavirus crisis against Donald Trump, who basically refuses to. Let's go to another video. So this, again, I thought was effective. Less straightforward than the last one, kind of cheesy, but interesting nonetheless.
I like to drive. I used to think I was a pretty good driver. If I didn't get a chance to flat shift in the second, I was afraid I'd go through those guys.
Tomorrow morning, we're talking about cars and what car you'd like to see come back.
I love this car. Nothing but incredible memories. Every time I get in, I think of my dad and Bo. God, can my dad drive a car? Oof. The thing I like most is the setup right here. And you feel like you're in complete control. This is just boom. Now, you stand in the front here. This is iconic industry. How can American-made vehicles no longer be out there? I believe that we can own the 21st century market again by moving to electric vehicles. And by the way, they tell me, and I'm looking forward, if it's true, to driving one, that they're making an electric Corvette and go 200 miles an hour. You think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding. So I'm excited about it.
Again, obviously, it shared on Twitter. Everyone was like, Twitter's a young demographic. Everyone's like, this is a completely stupid advert. It's cheesy. It's nonsense. But if you put yourself in older voters' shoes, potentially someone who might have voted for Donald Trump, so someone who loves American cars, who loves the familiarity of someone who sort of says, America, it's a kind of all-American image, right? Also, I think it's supposed to prove that he can still drive, because that was my main worry was, you sort of look at it, you're like, is he okay to drive? But, I think he's filmed driving in it, so presumably his eyes are good enough to retain a license. What did you make of it, Aaron?
Well, there are some bad drivers out there. Not necessarily a test of motor coordination, no pun intended. I thought it was great. I thought they were both amazing adverts, and I think there's a lesson to be learned there for the radical left as well. Actually, you don't always need to wear your heart on your sleeve and say we're going to change everything. We're going to solve all these. You need to do that too. Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn. You need to do that too. But there also needs to be a strategy for dampening down the attack lines of your opponent, which neither politician really ever addressed. And I can't recall. I can remember adverts with Jeremy Corbyn where he was trying to address multiple age demographics and actually share loads in common, which obviously they do. Have a shared economic interest in a bunch of ways, or you need social care just like they need free university tuition. But there was never leaning in specifically to an older demographic, and I thought that the second one in particular does that super well, because you can it's not even for people that are meant to vote for Joe Biden. I think that is about neutralizing the worst attack line from Donald Trump. That is addressed purely at hardcore Trump voters. They watch that and they go, he's not that bad. And you know what? On the day, they might just not turn out to vote.
That's interesting.
I think it's just about sort of dampening down the kind of the feverishness against, and it's not just against radical left politicians. It wasn't just Sanders and Corbyn. We saw the exact same thing with Hillary Clinton in 2016. And I think it's about sort of dampening down that feverishness, saying he's a normal person, but also, the very people who are being set up to hate him the most, they're the target here. I don't think it's actually Democratic or Biden voters. I think they're both brilliant adverts.
The climate car angle is also interesting, right? Because obviously the Democrats are worried that climate change is going to be a weakness for them because Americans love climate change, and they've at least made some indication that they might try and challenge it. Even though I doubt a Biden presidency is going to be particularly impressive on climate, but to make it all about we can lead on cars again, I think is probably the right angle to go if you want to have some sort of climate-friendly politics in the United States and not get trashed at the. I think the voting challenge. The big challenge for the left is, we have to win over boomers. We do. It's not people go, oh, well, the electorate of tomorrow wants X, Y, Z. That's great. Fantastic. Labour and the Democrats should not throw that away, right? Which I think actually right now Labour look like they may be doing. It's not, it's not a done deal. But that's not enough right now to win. And one more thing, in 2017, Labour won a huge number of votes. I think they increased their number of votes, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think 3.5 million, 3 million. The share of the vote went up 10%. But although many people wanted to vote for Labour, wanted to vote for Jeremy Corbyn, many people also wanted to vote for anybody but Jeremy Corbyn. And that's why, we have to remember Theresa May got 42% in 2017, primarily, I think, because she was, promising to deliver a hard Brexit, but also because there were many people in that particular election, the people that wanted to vote for Jeremy Corbyn, I think outweighed the people who were like, anybody but Corbyn can win. We didn't see that in 2019. No, that's a super good point, actually. People don't mention that because it's not just saying we needed people. You need to reassure people who aren't going to vote Labour anyway, because then they might not vote Conservative, right?
Exactly. They might just not turn out. They go, okay, well, if he wins,
or vote.
Right, I think that's what Biden's trying to do. Oh, okay, if Biden wins, it's not the end of the world. Whereas Hillary Clinton, that evil woman, cannot win. I think they've really defanged that quite well. I still don't think he's going to win necessarily, but I think it's an important observation.
Let's look at the other side of the Joe Biden campaign, the less successful one. And unfortunately, this is an unavoidable part of the Joe Biden campaign because it's the part that involves Joe Biden speaking live, off the cuff, and without his operatives able to sort of cut and chop it and take numerous takes if he says the wrong thing. We've got 3 clips for you. The first is Biden speaking on Wednesday. It's caused some controversy, rightly, I think, in the United States. Let's take a look.
Yes, and by the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African-American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things.
So unlike the African-American community, the Latino community is a diverse community with different attitudes about different things. Obviously, the implication there being that the African-American community has the same attitudes about all of the things. Let's look at, before I go to you, Aaron, another video where he tries to clarify that comment. So it's a video call later in that day, and where he tries to expand on this point to make it sound less offensive, I suppose.
We can build a new administration that reflects the full diversity of our nation and the full diversity of Latino communities. Now, when I mean full diversity, unlike the African-American community and many other communities, you're from everywhere, from Europe, from the tip of South America, all the way to our border in Mexico and in the Caribbean. And different backgrounds, different ethnicities, but all Latinos.
So, I mean, you can see the point he's trying to make. He's saying, look, I wasn't saying that black people will think the same, but if you're looking at sort of voting patterns, then in America, Cubans vote in a very different way to how Mexicans vote or Puerto Ricans vote. And so you're looking at, a set of people with very different political values. Again, I just don't think that's a particularly, there are so many different political values within the African-American community. You could see that in the Democratic primaries, younger people lining up behind Bernie Sanders, older people lining up behind Joe Biden. But what was also weird about that is when he was making this point about Latinos being from various different countries, he didn't just say, Latin American countries in the Caribbean, he also said Europe. And to me, either that means he thinks, I suppose, Spanish people are Latino, or Italians, I suppose, Latin. I don't know. Who does he think is Latino from Europe? Or is he talking about people's origins? So obviously people, or many Latin Americans, are historically have some European origin in them, Italian, Spanish, whatever. But then if that's the point he's making, you can say exactly the same thing about African Americans. Because, Africa as a country is just as diverse, not as a country, oh my God. Africa as a continent is just as diverse as Europe as a continent. And so to say, so either he's confused about what Latino means, or he thinks that ultimately African Americans all originate in exactly the same place or somewhere with far less diversity than Europe. It just seemed bizarre to me. Aaron, what did you make of it?
I'm going to be a bit more charitable. I think in terms of Spanish first and second speakers, it is a broader mix, and obviously they're newer arrivals to the United States than most African Americans. Of course, there are many African Americans who might be first or second generation. Barack Obama, for instance, his father was from Kenya, but it's generally speaking a more settled population historically over the last several hundred years. But what I thought, and I got it completely wrong, what I thought he originally was talking about, and that second video where he's clarifying his point, wasn't that. I thought he was just talking about voting patterns, like you said. That's what I thought he meant, which is true. African Americans vote en masse for Democrats, and Latinos generally vote Democrat too. I think in the last election about 65%. But like you say, Cubans actually tend to go Republican. And in Florida, which is a swing state, it's a really important bellwether state, there's lots of Cubans. So that's what I thought he meant. They're sort of, in terms of their voting patterns, are more heterogeneous. But of course, with Joe's cognitive decline, he sort of put it in a poor way, but that's not what he meant anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Let's look at, speaking of cognitive decline, let's look at another clip, which I think actually shows what's going to be a bigger problem for Joe Biden.
Have you taken a cognitive test?
No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying before you got in this program, if you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not, what do you think, huh? Are you a junkie?
What do you say to President Trump, who brags about his test and makes your mental state an issue for voters?
Well, if he can't figure out the difference between an elephant and a lion, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Did you watch that? Look, come on, man. I know you're trying to goad me, but I mean, I'm so forward looking to have an opportunity to sit with the president or stand with the president in debates. There's going to be plenty of time. And by the way, as I joke with him, you know, I shouldn't say it. I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't say. Anyway, I am very willing to let the American public judge my physical and mental my physical as well as my mental fitness.
That's terrible, man.
It's really bad, isn't it? And you're also going to see, because do you remember there was a period where, you know, everyone was joking about Donald Trump because he had that really off the wall interview where he was saying, and then they asked me to do remember the 5 things in order, and then you have to do it at the end of the interview. Like, what was it? Like man, woman, dog. I can't remember what the 5 things were, but they give you 5 things at the start of the test, and then you have to repeat them at the end of the test. And if in the same order, you get extra points, is the way that Donald Trump said it. It's a test to see if you've got dementia or not. So the idea that you've got a politician bragging that they haven't got dementia seems like a very low bar. But because of the context it's in, where I think probably most people think that Biden would fail it, right? Because even in answering that question, he couldn't finish sentences. So he says forward looking instead of looking forward. And then he's fluffing all of these words, talking about mental fitness. And, you know, watching that, you do think, oh, the reason he doesn't want to take the test and the reason why he's really awkward laughing and giving these really awkward responses about, it's like you being on cocaine. It's sort of like, whoa, calm down. You're obviously incredibly stressed about the possibility that you would be made to take a test about cognitive decline. And the thing I'm really worried about, the thing I think could be like a game changer in this election, and obviously, you know, I don't want a game changer in this election. I don't think Biden's particularly impressive, but I don't want 4 years of Donald Trump for, I suppose, world safety, would be if at the start, the host shows both of them like a list of 5 words, and then at the end of the debate gets them to read out the 5 words. And I feel like, you know, Biden would be so stressed about remembering the 5 words in the right order that he'd probably fluff up the whole of the rest of the debate, then get it wrong. Trump will get it right, be really proud of himself, and then everyone will be like, Trump won the debate because he's in an earlier stage of cognitive decline than Joe Biden. It's the risk, though, right? Because obviously he's neutralized all of the attack lines that were thrown at Hillary Clinton quite effectively. You know, he's sort of downplaying the idea that this is a cultural struggle between 2 different Americas, you know, the good America versus, he's sort of saying, look, I'm an ordinary inclusive guy, and I'm just going to be a bit more competent than the last guy. You know, you don't have to feel like voting for me or Trump determines your, you know, worthiness as a person. You know, it's just quite a simple, downplayed choice. I'm the competent guy. You can relate to me. It's fine. That was what they've learned from Hillary Clinton. But they've also, as happens in politics, a new problem has emerged, which they don't seem like they've planned for, which is
it new?
His biggest weakness.
Is it new? I mean, do you remember Hillary when she responded to that bubble tea? I mean, that was really weird in 2016.
No, but she could finish sentences.
I think, and this is again, people might accuse people of ageism. I think actually a tiny proportion of the population is capable of doing top level politics. It's imagine for 4 years, 5 years, 5 hours sleep a night, incredibly anxious, you know, big decisions on you, very stressful. You've got legacy media, you've got new media. It's also just a politically difficult time, right? Since 2008, the challenges are really momentous. I think most people of most ages would struggle to engage in frontline politics, which is why I think Jeremy Corbyn, in many ways, we saw that with Theresa May, by the way. Theresa May was a shell of a person at the end of her premiership, right? Understandably, by the way. I think 99% of people would have been. And I think one of the things that people have to respect and admire with Jeremy Corbyn is, you know, he was actually quite resilient. He looked quite healthy and quite happy. And it was quite strange when you did get these attack lines. Oh, Corbyn's had a stroke and so on. Okay, well, he looks incredible. He sounds great for his age, whatever. But I do think it's important to say, well, look, if you think a 40 or a 50-year-old is going to struggle in that context, that demanding professional context, you're stretching your mind and body to the very limit, you know, somebody in their mid-70s is really going to struggle. That's not an indictment on Joe Biden or Donald Trump necessarily, or Nancy Pelosi who's 80. If somebody who's 30, 40, 50 is going to struggle under those conditions, somebody of that age is naturally, you know, going to have periods like Joe Biden where they don't make much sense, right? Or Donald Trump is going to have an interview where, you know, he has maybe the he has maybe the sort of reading age of like a 14 or 13-year-old, maybe younger. Right? I mean, some of that's intentional. I don't think all of it is, though. So that's a really important point to make. We're an aging society. We're seeing older legislators, older politicians, but they're under intense pressure. It's not easy. And we've been here before, by the way. Ronald Reagan, in his second term, we now know this, in his second term, in the final years of the Cold War, Ronald Reagan had Alzheimer's. He was getting dementia. His factual recall was going. He was often not making much sense. And these are people who have a literal life and death power over millions of other people. So, I think it's to be taken very, very seriously. They can sign executive orders that can change people's lives at the flick of a switch. I don't think it should be taken lightly that both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, aren't necessarily up to the job cognitively. It's not an ableist comment. It's not an ageist comment. It's a really serious point because, like I said, we've been here before. You don't want somebody who is not physically and mentally up to the job in such an important role.
I mean, it's not just that, because Bernie could finish. Bernie seemed like sharp as, right? But so I mean,
it could have happened. It could have happened to him. I think it's a very good criticism of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is what, 78? 2 terms, really? I mean, somebody in their 80s. It's the most challenging job in the world. I really think, I'm not saying it's a young person's game. People at 30 should do it. There's probably a sweet spot of 40 to 60. But you're putting your body under immense pressure, 4 or 5 hours sleep a night and so on. Not easy. I mean, Margaret Thatcher did it. She used to sleep 4 hours a night. But did she make particularly good decisions as a result? Probably not. I think it's a really important conversation to have. And that's why, I'm really happy we have a party system in this country. You can do government in this country where it's not by a strong man. I mean, that's how we've chosen to do it for decades, but it doesn't have to be like that. In a presidential system, that's the norm. And it's interesting, if you look at the French Republic, they've had younger presidents now, Francois Hollande, Sarkozy, and of course now the incumbent, Macron, all younger. They're very demanding position, the French president, probably the single most powerful executive elected role in the world in many ways, because the constitutional constraints on the French president are far less than they are on the US president, and it's a nuclear power. So, I think it's an important thing to talk about the cognitive decline, and it doesn't mean we're being horrible or nasty or the alt left. It's a really, really important conversation, especially in an era of demographic aging. It's going to happen more and more.
Although, given the fact that it's Biden versus Trump, we want more of the come on, man, driving a car, reassuring boomers, and less of the Joe Biden live on TV. So Joe Biden, please stop talking.
He did. Maybe our viewers can say this in the comments. He definitely did something during the Democratic primaries where people were like, wow, Biden's really impressive today. And he was like a totally different person. Maybe they gave him Adderall or I don't know. Maybe they gave him something.
I don't remember it.
You don't remember it?
It happened.
Maybe that's what they'll do in the debates, and he'll come out and can I also say, he is, again, this is not meant to be a sort of a derisory comment. He looks great. The amount of Botox and the sort of the hair transplant, he looks fantastic.
Trump?
Obviously, Trump looks terrible. Trump looks appalling. Joe Biden, he's like a really handsome older guy. It worked. I mean, you look at him he's got more hair now than he did 30 years ago. Good for him. This stuff, under a radical social democracy, this stuff should be on the NHS. You should look fantastic at any age.
I agree with that. All right, we're going to end there tonight, Aaron. Thank you, everyone, for your super chats tonight. If you want to support us directly, you know where to go, novaramedia.com/support. We'll be back on Monday at 8 p.m. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so you know when we go live. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.